Content Podcast, episode 94. I'm with Devon Hardy in Montreal. So nice to go for a walk with you, Devon.
Nice to go for a walk with you too, Claude.
So we have already spoken in the sense that I moderated a panel just last week that the Cepamo organization pulled together, and we recorded your presentation about the Creative Green Project. And I'm very excited about that, and I want you to talk about it later. But I'd like to get to know you a bit better in terms of your background, because it's an interesting one, being a science person working in the arts. And so why don't we start there with just a quick introduction of your background and how you came to work in this field that I might call the hybrid field of arts and science.
Sure, yeah. Well, I studied environmental science in my bachelor's degree, and that took me a few places. I ended up becoming really interested in water. I did a
lot of it around us now.
Yes. I was in a co-op program. I did a few placements at municipal departments on water-related projects. So I ended up studying integrated water resources management for my master's degree. And I kind of I bounced around to a few jobs in the water/sustainability sector after that. It was probably maybe 4 years that I was in kind of different positions, trying to find something that I was really interested in. And all I really wanted to do was hang out with my friends at the Fringe Festival and, go see theater and, work with artists and talk to artists. And so I decided to attempt to, blend these two passions in a professional sense, it's been a little bit up and down. At first, I quit this job that I was working at and tried to become self-employed, which is difficult because I learned after that theater companies don't have money to hire environmental consultants.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. So I tried doing that for a while, and I ended up, I had been connecting with a lot of folks who were also in this intersection, one of whom is Ian Garrett. And we started talking about the creative green tools and how it had been talked about for a long time that they should be brought to Canada and we should have this framework here. And so I was really motivated and probably bored too. And I applied for the first grant, got some of the partners together, and we got it. So we got our first grant from the Canada Council in April 2020. And then it just kind of went from there, and it kept building and, getting more and more interest. And now we're on the cusp of launching, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and you had some news yesterday of more funding, so that makes the project all the more viable. And
yeah, it's looking like we're, at the very least, we're going to be able to run the program until the end of 2022, but I imagine that it will, unless it's a complete disaster, I imagine it will continue to be funded and go longer than that.
Yeah, and be supported by the community.
Yeah.
Well, let me insert here an excerpt from the presentation you gave in Toronto so that you don't have to repeat all that because you explained it very clearly. Let's move to Devon, who I first met a few years ago in a cafe in Montreal, and I'd heard about this Devon Hardy, who is such a hardworking scientist in the art sector. So it impressed me, and she was doing at the time, and still doing similar work, which is to help artists and arts organizations measure their carbon footprint and to be more ecologically responsible, I guess, through use of science, of measurement and technology. So that's how I got to know Devon, and I know she's working on a really important project for everyone now that she'll talk about. But she holds a master's degree in integrated water resource management, which is, maybe that's an art form, I'm not sure. But anyway, she's a hard worker, and she's coming to us from Montreal. So I will pass the floor to you, Devon, and I think you have a presentation at one point, and after your presentation, we'll again open the floor to everyone. So welcome, Devon.
Hi, everybody. As Claude said, my name is Devon Hardy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the project manager for the Canadian Creative Green Tools Adaptation Project. As Claude mentioned, I have a background in environmental science and water resource management. And I spent about 5 years working in water and sustainability related positions in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors before deciding that I really wanted to bring my passion for arts and culture into my work. So I've been working on this particular project since about 2019, and I'm very excited with what we've been able to achieve so far, and I'm excited for what's to come as well, which I'll be sharing with you in just a moment. Like Anthony, I'm also located on Tiohtià:ke, colonially known as Montreal. Myself and a lot of my collaborators are here. And as we do this work, we really recognize that we are living and working on stolen land with a horrific colonial history. And we're committed to actively working with Indigenous communities indefinitely to ensure that we create programming that is respectful, equitable, and welcoming to Indigenous artists, organizations, and communities. So before I begin, I'll kind of show you who is doing this work. It's not just me. There are a lot of people and organizations. So the project is currently at the moment being carried out by 4 main partners. The Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts has had a relationship with Julie's Bicycle, who I'll talk about in a moment, for over a decade, and has been a main driver of the project from the beginning. The Quebec Drama Federation took the initiative to apply for funding for the project, first starting in 2019, and they're presently the recipients of their second Sector Innovation and Development Grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to carry out this project. They're joined by Climatable, who joined the project at the beginning of 2021 with funding from the Government of Canada's Sustainable Development Goals funding program. And the Conseil québécois des événements éco-responsables, or the CQEER, is leading the Francophone arm of the project. And they have also received funding from the Government of Quebec this year to increase our engagement with Francophone communities and improve the French version of the Creative Green Tools. So I'd just like to give a really sincere thank you to all of our funders, because this work wouldn't be possible without them. So, I mentioned 4 of our partners, but the project is really being supported by a coalition of organizations who are making it possible and helping it to reach its full potential. So I've listed these partners here, and I really can't stress enough how much each and every one of our partners has been invaluable to the success of the project.
So now we're getting an idea, and we'll come back to other excerpts from that presentation, but I'm a sound walker, so I'm enjoying this. We're in a back street of Montreal, and there's all kinds of lovely little trickling sounds that occasional cars, but mostly a more quiet space. So we're just going to go up the ruelle again here. So tell me more about why you are drawn to this idea of measuring a carbon footprint of arts organizations. Aren't arts organizations relatively low in the environmental impact? I mean, I know why you're doing it, but I want to hear you tell us why.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know. first of all, I'm a very, data-driven scientific person. So the idea of measuring something instead of just guessing is appealing to me, and I think it's important. I think it's a really good first step for organizations, especially those that haven't really engaged with environmental sustainability in this way before. Because if they can get a picture of their carbon footprint, they can actually see where their major impacts are coming from and take steps to address those. Rather than kind of fixating on things that, while...
Sorry, this is a little sound moment here.
Oh.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Instead of fixating on things that, while, not negligible, might... Okay, what am I trying to say? I've noticed some organizations they'll fixate on things like the straws at their bar or the cups at their bar or something like that, which is not it's not a bad thing to do. Reducing single-use plastic is important, but they might be ignoring a really big impact. That same organization might be like using like 1,500 kilograms of plywood and steel to build a set that they throw out 3 weeks later, or flying artists all over the country all the time and doing short haul flights, and I think that measuring those things are important. And there's a quote by somebody that's, you can't change what you can't measure, which I don't think is true in all cases, but I just think it's a really good place to start.
And it leads to other things, as we know from the Julie's Bicycle experience in the UK, is that once you start measuring your footprint more carefully, then it changes your attitude towards your work and eventually your artistic programming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's this ripple effect, right? Like, I don't believe that, like, the arts and culture sector is driving climate change, and we need to be really cracking down on small theater companies and their wasteful ways, but it's about engaging an entire sector in a movement, and seeing what kinds of effects those can have elsewhere. Because, I mean, the arts and culture sector is like the loudest and most persuasive, and the engaging artists has the potential to really have a big impact on other sectors, or on their patrons, or there's a lot of places you can go.
Well, let's listen to a bit more of your presentation, and then I'll ask you about the impact it's having in the community so far.
So in case anyone here is not yet familiar with the Creative Green tools, I thought it'd be appropriate to do a quick introduction. They are a comprehensive set of carbon calculation and reporting tools that were created specifically for the arts and culture sector. So they provide the sector with a simple and accessible way to calculate and report on their environmental impacts. And essentially, they're tailored to take into account the specific scope of activities that are common in arts and culture. So users can create carbon footprints for buildings like offices, theaters, or museums, or projects, which could include tours, theatrical productions, exhibits, festivals, really any kind of event. And the impacts taken into account include energy, water, waste, travel, freight, materials, and a few more beyond those as well. So to give you a little bit more background on the tools, they were first created in 2009 by Julie's Bicycle, which is a UK-based charity whose mission is to support the creative community to act on climate change and environmental sustainability. So they were designed specifically to be simple and accessible and to motivate change in the industry. And since they were created, they've been continuously approved and improved, and updated based on feedback from the sector, which has resulted in a really high quality platform that's helped England's arts and culture sector to achieve a 41% reduction in carbon emissions over a 6-year period. And Anthony mentioned in his presentation that Arts Council England mandates its national portfolio organizations to do environmental reporting, and the Creative Green Tools is what they use to do that reporting. And so they've been working with Julie's Bicycle since the inception of the tools, and together they've created a program that's been really successful and really impactful. So we felt that it could be a good thing to adapt for our local context and see how we could implement it here as well. So we're really proud of what we're building right now because it's been built according to the demonstrated needs of the sector. When this project started, we received our first funding in April 2020, and we spent an entire year just doing research and consultation with the sector and listening to what potential users had to say about this topic. And we feel that this approach is paying off because we took our time and we did our homework, and we're also continuing to do that. So open to growing and changing as the program is launched and begins to run. So our tools will be available in English and French, and all of our programming will be bilingual as well. We've also been working with Nehewin, an Indigenous-led consulting agency, to consult with Indigenous artists, organizations, and communities with the goal of building inclusive programming that is enriched by traditional knowledge and making the Creative Green Tools a welcoming digital space for Indigenous users. We're also aiming to make the platform accessible, and we've just finished undertaking a web accessibility audit with the goal of making the tools accessible to anyone, regardless of ability. And in addition to addressing accessibility from a technical point of view, we're also about to undergo a rigorous review of the language on the platform to ensure that it is not only accessible, but also inclusive, non-judgmental, and doesn't assume supremacy of Western standards of environmental stewardship over traditional knowledge. And of course, the goal is to make the platform free to use, and that's to ensure access so that it can be so that access can be equitable, and we can remove any additional barriers to engagement. And hopefully, you'll be seeing these tools launched in March 2022. So it's actually they're coming very soon. And the Creative Green Tools also have a section called Beyond Carbon that aims to build awareness, and it surveys users about practices that don't necessarily lead to direct reductions on the measured carbon emissions in the tools, but that still have positive environmental or social outcomes. So this section has questions relating to everything from everyday environmental best practices to governance and leadership, climate change adaptation, and Indigenous sovereignty. So there are a lot of benefits to disseminating the Creative Green Tools across Canada. And one is that they really provide an accessible framework within which arts and culture organizations can quantify their greenhouse gas emissions and work to reduce them. And for a lot of organizations, this may be their first step towards engaging in climate action. A narrative that I heard a lot before I started doing this work was that a lot of the folks in my community, the artists and cultural workers, were really passionate about environmental action and were scared of the impacts of climate change and wanted to do something, but they weren't exactly sure how to start. And so engaging with a platform, creating a profile, creating a carbon footprint, and getting kind of a first, an initial idea of your organization's impact and where you could go from there is a really great first step to engagement that kind of clarifies things and gives you something to build off of. On a wider scale, the tools will also allow us to create a national environmental data set with which we can view trends, set goals, and actually develop targeted environmental programming that addresses the demonstrated needs of the sector. And so they can really be used to provide a solid foundation on which a much larger environmental framework can be built. And from an advocacy point of view, this is a tool not only for quantifying emissions, but also for increasing climate literacy across the sector and fostering awareness and knowledge sharing and collaboration. Plus, it allows the arts and culture sectors to set an example for other sectors that will hopefully create a ripple effect outwards and motivate even more climate action. So those are the tools, and I'd welcome any questions that anybody has about them or about our programming. Feel free to ask away.
Well, thank you, Devon. That's probably too much information for some people because if they're approaching it for the first time, but it's good that it's documented because it's coming and it's a long time coming. It's Canada is a bit behind in its measurement tools and other tools, educational tools, practical tools, but there's more and more of them. There's a Canadian Green Alliance that are building tools, and in the film and television industry, there's also a lot of activity going on. So I think there's catch-up and there's also coordination happening between the different partners because we can't afford to have parallel activities that don't know about each other. And that's one of the reasons we created Scale, is to make sure that there's that collaboration and that working together and that all voices are heard. And I think the arts councils and other institutions are also listening and doing their own work. The Canada Council announced a Social Innovation Fund recently. Those kinds of initiatives will help us to go much faster, much further in the kind of work that the Creative Green Tools is doing, which is giving us what we need to change. We don't need the permission to change, we need the tools to change. And so thank you, Devon, for that excellent work, and I look forward to it coming out. So it's too soon to tell, right? The tool isn't even out yet, but have you been getting good feedback? Are artists and arts organizations interested in doing this kind of work?
Yeah, we've been getting really good feedback. Even more positive than I expected, actually. I kind of expected a little bit more pushback, like, people saying, why are you giving me more work to do? Yeah. But it's been really positive. People have been really motivated, like folks that have participated in some of our consultation work or our user testing trials, like have really been excited about it.
Well, we'll see. Once it's launched, and that is fairly soon, in a few months. So we're in December 16th today, 2021. And for those who are just tuning in late to this episode, with Devon Hardy, and we're walking in the back streets of Montreal, where you live, where I used to live. And there was here in Montreal recently, Culture Montréal set up a commission. I'm seeing around the country, because I've talked to a lot of people, there is momentum growing. There's this organization Scale that both of us are participating in, but there is a lack of tools. There's an education work group in Scale, and we keep saying we need to provide artists with, what they're lacking in terms of the ability not only to measure their footprint, because there actually are tools out there to do it.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is one that's you and your colleagues are doing is one that is specifically tailored to arts organizations' operations, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, going to make a difference in terms of eventually also governments will be expecting this kind of reporting and maybe, a sustainability plan or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible that the program that we launch here will end up mirroring the program that Julie's Bicycle and Arts Council England have in the UK, where there's, reporting requirements for organizations that are funded by whichever Arts Council is implementing the program. So, I mean, I think that could be a good thing for, driving uptake of the tools and for really gathering a lot of good data. Like, we're going to be, like, we have a national data set that's about to emerge, and that's a really powerful thing.
What's that?
Well, I mean, like, if we can gather data from across the country, from arts and culture organizations across the country, and kind of build a data set over time, then we'll actually be able to understand, like, what kind of programming we need for environmental sustainability in the arts and culture sector. Okay. We can actually, like, do that based on the demonstrated needs of the community.
But it's a vocation as much as it is a job, right?
Yeah.
Because you believe deeply in that this is needed and you're putting your heart and soul into it, which I appreciate, by the way, because it's a really valuable contribution to the, emerging. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I published a paper by Shannon Litzenberger, who talked about essentially a call to the arts community to mobilize and to address, issues of decolonization and those kinds of changes that are necessary, not just because of the climate emergency, though that's the most urgent in my mind, but other issues of things essentially falling apart in our society, right? There's so many challenges, and artists are both, part of the problem and part of the solution, not that there's any one solution. But I see the Creative Green project as actually being bigger than it seems to be, because and it's not just about measurement, because that's quite a technical thing. It's what that information will bring to communities when they start making decisions about their programming and their role and what they want to do and how they're going to deal with the fact that the world is in a sort of permanent state of crisis because of the baked-in climate changes, which you know all about because you studied science, right? But for artists, it's harder to get a hold of it, and there's a lot of unacknowledged eco-anxiety, which I've been exploring. All that to say that I'm interested to see, and I'll go to another excerpt of your presentation here, the part where you answer some questions from the audience, because it's interesting the way that the arts community are curious about what you're doing and what Anthony Garofalus is doing in terms of policy. Like, how are we going to move forward together in making these massive changes, and that the role of the arts not only is retained but amplified, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's why I think Creative Green is important, especially that we made in Canada version, right? Because we could have adopted some other model and just said, well, here we go. But you took the time, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about your relation with Indigenous communities, because I know you're working with a firm, and you've focused on that to make sure that part of the project was well thought through. So how's that working out?
Yeah, well, we've been working with an Indigenous-led consulting agency called Nehewin. It's Hunter and Jacqueline Cardinal are the brother-sister team that run that. And we started working with them in April when we started, the next round of funding, because we had, in our first year, the first year that was funded was just research and consultation. We spoke to organizations across the country about, theoretically, if they were going to be using tools like this, what would they want, what would they need, what are their barriers, etc. And we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that all communities were represented in those consultations. So I think, about 20% of the organizations we spoke to were Indigenous-led organizations. And things started to come up that, myself and our outreach coordinator, who was working with me at the time, felt really warranted more exploration. Because, a 2-hour conversation with other organizations there talking about all kinds of topics, it just wasn't enough to actually go into some of these really important issues that were brought up. And so we wanted to actually hire an Indigenous consultant to start exploring those things more. So we've been working with them. Hunter's been consulting with Indigenous artists, Indigenous-led organizations, knowledge keepers from across the country, and has been learning a lot and has been advising us on what he's been learning, and that's been really, really useful, and we've been able to make much more informed decisions because of that, and we've had to change course a little bit because we learned new information and we decided that maybe what we were doing wasn't the best. And so, for example, after our first round of consultations, there had been a couple of suggestions about, well, you should make the CG tools available in an Indigenous language. And we thought, well, that's a great idea. That's we shouldn't just be, this kind of French-English binary in Canada that kind of sees those as the only two languages that are acknowledged is not right. And it's a product of colonialism. So we thought this is a great idea. We'll consult with, Nehewin will do their consultation process, and they'll help us learn more about, which language we should be translating the tools into. But after speaking with a lot of folks, he actually came back to me and he said, honestly, I would advise that you don't do this, and that you spend the money that you were going to spend on this in a different way that could be a lot more impactful for Indigenous users and Indigenous artists who engage with the program. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of reasons for that. There were a number of reasons why that action could have been more performative than helpful. And so it was we had to change course, but we changed course because we really spoke to the community and gauged what could be the most beneficial action. And it's
an ongoing process, right? As you
exactly.
launch the tools, people use them, they give you feedback, and
it's going to be. It's going to be an ongoing. They're going to be changing and adapting, and our program's going to be changing forever. It's they will never be. The tools will never be done, so.
Well, they'll help us all move forward, and that's the purpose.
Yeah.
And now I'll play a final excerpt from the panel that I think wraps things up nicely. Now, there's a couple of questions from Charles, who's right up here in the audience here in Toronto. I almost want you to ask them yourself, but I can read them out. It's probably easier. I'll move to Charles' second question, which is to Anthony and Devon. Can you say what impact your work is having within the arts and on government arts policies and programs?
Devon, did you want to speak to the question from Charles?
Sure, yeah. I'm just going to look at it again. Impact the work is having within the arts and on government arts policies and programs. I guess so. Within the arts, I have a similar answer to Anthony in that currently no impact because we haven't launched yet. But I think it has a lot of potential to empower artists and arts organizations on a wide scale to actually take environmental action, because it provides that first bit of awareness and information that they can go on. And I will just clarify that the tools really are, they're meant to empower, because there's one concern that I've had, and I know that others have had, is that if there's this kind of measurement framework available and there's comparison and measurement, will that lead to shaming of somebody's environmental impact, or a slap on the wrist for those who don't comply with something? But it really is meant to, the tools are meant to be informative and not punitive. I would never and will never support programming that, creates additional barriers to funding, or punitive measures against an arts organization that has a certain environmental impact, because there are all kinds of reasons why impacts exist. So yeah, I guess that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, in terms of what impact it could have on arts policies and programs, I think there's a lot of potential, because the Creative Green tools could create a common framework within which arts councils and other funders can understand the impacts and the actions of their grantees. Because we don't kind of have this a common framework yet, and there isn't really a way for organizations to measure these things and compare with others in the sector and really understand their impacts. Arts councils can't necessarily understand those impacts either. So I have gotten questions when speaking to folks at arts councils about, well, what kind of environmental granting programs can we have, and how do we evaluate them? And that's a really great question. And having a simple framework for understanding that better, I think, has a lot of potential, for understanding more about your grantees, but also for making funding available to make necessary changes. If you can communicate to an arts council that actually we need to retrofit this whole space with LED lights, or a new HVAC system or something like that, and you can provide evidence to back that up, that creates a lot of potential to actually be able to take those steps and make those changes. So I think there could be a lot of good stuff coming down the pipeline.
One last question, Devon. What do you recommend? Like, there's a lot of scientists who would like your training in science, who would love to work in the arts. Do you have any thoughts for them in terms of how to work more closely with artists? Is there anything that they should, in terms of their training, or who they hang out with, or what they do, that can lead them to collaborating? Because I know the science needs arts, but the arts also need scientists, right? There needs to be that fusion.
That's a great question. I mean, for me, it was very much just that my social circle took me in this direction. But I think that those connections are really valuable, and other kind of colleagues of mine in more scientific fields, I've noticed there's a desire to connect on that level, being able to engage with artists on topics like this and find more compelling ways to talk about them, I think is a really valuable thing. In terms of how to make that connection, I mean, I don't know, go to the theater, go I guess if you have kind of a lot of people have some kind of a hobby or an interest, or some kind of art that they like to view or take part in. So I guess kind of whatever your chosen art form is that you like to either engage in or consume, I feel like that's a good starting point. For me, it was theater because I was just around theater people all the time. But I mean, for somebody else, they might be really into visual arts, and they might have
or media arts, or some of the more hybrid art forms now that combine science and art.
Yeah, exactly.
Ecological art. And well, the reason I asked that is that this organization Scale is one opportunity, by the way, for scientists who want to know more about art and climate change. There's an organization that's in the works, but also just getting out of the isolation of disciplinary silos. Right, in the sciences, there's a lot of siloing.
Yeah.
And there is in the arts as well. And there's reasons for that, historically and all that. But, if this world is going to move ahead, we need to have that kind of cross-pollination, what people call cross-sectoral collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's not a new thing. It's been going on forever, really, if you think about it. But I just would like people to feel that it's easy to make connections with people with whom you have affinities, either personal affinities or professional affinities, and just get on with the work of working together. And you've done it successfully, coming out of a certain type of scientific training and then retaining that knowledge and those skills and then applying them in another context. And I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's leave it at that. I think this is ATSA's office, Action Terroriste Socialement Acceptable.
Oh, yeah. I think you're right.
It's her office. Now, I can't remember I did an episode with Annie in the...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think it's like that one or something. Because I remember looking...
Oh, that's kind of
finding them for some reason and then realizing that we were neighbors.
Well, they're good neighbors. I've known her for a long, long time. And in fact, I'll play a little excerpt of her interview now.
Être créatif, c'est-tu aussi s'éloigner du monde pur à la source tel qu'il est, plutôt que de juste accepter aussi que on est bien petit puis qu'on devrait revenir à l'essentiel. Je ne sais pas si l'art nous ramène à l'essentiel versus nous ramène à dériver complètement. Peut-être que la créativité ou la création, ça nous amène tellement loin qu'on s'imagine vivre sur Mars dans une espèce de plateforme pas d'allure, dénuée de tu sais, comme où est-ce qu'on n'aura plus besoin des oiseaux, puis des tempêtes, puis des ci, puis des ça. On va avoir recréé un univers de toutes pièces où est-ce qu'il fait donc bon vivre. Ça pourrait être ça, l'apport de l'art. Ben moi, je l'aime pas trop, cet art-là. Tu sais.
Because Annie is a hero of mine because she's been doing this sort of social engaged art forever, right?
Yeah.
And before it was, popular, they just went out in the streets and did art about social issues, and there's something about that kind of smartness around art practice that I've always appreciated. So let's go back towards your place.
Sure,
and so remind people, I guess there'll be a website, right, for Creative Green?
Yeah, we're going to be launching a landing page soon. Right now, all the information is just on the partners' websites, the QDF, the CSPA. But we're going to be launching a more central site soon, which will have all the information about the program, and it will also take folks directly to the tools. So, yeah.
Well, that's my daughter, so I think I better answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Devon.
You're welcome.